Scout had never so much as growled at a civilian, until the day he tore across a crowded plaza and sank his teeth into a man's groin without warning. Witnesses screamed, phones recorded, and within minutes his handler was suspended and Scout was sentenced to death. So what made the department's most trusted K9 snap without provocation? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jefferson Park Plaza as Officer Sean Adler adjusted his sunglasses, scanning the busy shopping district with practiced vigilance. Beside him, Scout stood at perfect attention, the German Shepherd's alert posture, a stark contrast to the casual weekend shoppers drifting between boutiques and cafes. After 4 years together, Adler could read his partner's body language like a second language. The subtle ear movements, the almost imperceptible shifts in weight that signaled Scout's continuous assessment of their surroundings. "You guys pulled that double shift yesterday, right?" Officer Martinez asked, leaning against the patrol car. "Heard you found that missing dementia patient before he reached the highway." Adler nodded, allowing himself a small smile. Scout tracked him through 3 neighborhoods, found him disoriented behind that abandoned gas station on Westlake. He reached down to scratch behind Scout's ear. "That's another life you saved, buddy." Scout's service record spoke for itself. 24 drug busts, 8 missing persons found alive, and 3 department commendations for exceptional service. He was considered the gold standard in the department's K9 unit, with a temperament that balanced razor-sharp focus with a gentle demeanor. The plaza buzzed with weekend activity. Teenagers clustered around the central fountain. Parents with strollers navigating between outdoor cafe tables. Near the playground at the plaza's northern edge, a little girl with blonde pigtails played alone at the edge of the sandbox, occasionally glancing toward a woman absorbed in her phone several benches away. "You want coffee?" Martinez offered, gesturing toward the cafe across the walkway. "I'm good," Adler replied, his attention momentarily drawn to a man browsing the window display of an electronics store near the playground. Something about the man's posture struck Adler as odd, too stiff, too deliberate, but nothing that warranted direct attention. What happened next occurred with such shocking suddenness that later, when Adler gave his statement, he struggled to sequence the events clearly. Scout's body language transformed in an instant, from relaxed alertness to rigid intensity. Before Adler could process the change, the German Shepherd lunged forward with explosive power, snapping the reinforced lead with a sound like a gunshot. Scout bolted across the plaza, a blur of focused aggression moving faster than Adler had ever seen him move. The man by the electronics store barely had time to turn before Scout launched at him, jaws clamping around his groin with terrible precision. The man's scream cut through the ambient plaza noise like a siren, high and desperate. People froze, then scattered as Scout maintained his grip, growling with a ferocity Adler had never witnessed in their partnership. "Scout, release! Release!" Adler shouted, sprinting across the plaza, his commands carrying no authority for the first time ever. The man fell backward, Scout maintaining his grip with terrifying determination, blood already spreading across the man's khaki pants in an expanding dark stain. "Get this fucking dog off me!" the man screamed, his face contorted in agony as he ineffectually struck at Scout's head. Martinez reached them seconds behind Adler, both officers grabbing Scout's harness, trying to break his hold without success. Nearby, the blonde girl, Cassie, they would later learn, stood frozen in horror, her small hands pressed over her mouth, eyes wide with terror. "Break stick! In my belt!" Adler shouted to Martinez, who fumbled for the specialized tool. The crowd had formed a horrified circle around them, phones raised to capture the chaos. When they finally separated Scout from the man's body, the damage was catastrophic. Blood pulsed from the wound with each heartbeat. The fabric of his pants shredded to reveal mangled tissue beneath. Adler pressed his jacket against the injury, trying to stem the bleeding, while Martinez restrained Scout, who had suddenly gone eerily calm, as if a switch had been flipped. "Oh my God!" a woman screamed from the crowd. "That little girl saw everything!" Adler looked up to see Cassie backing away, tears streaming down her face before turning and running toward the apartment buildings adjacent to the plaza. A woman, presumably her mother, was pushing through the crowd, calling her name, but the girl had already disappeared around the corner. As sirens wailed in the distance, Adler met Scout's eyes. The dog sat perfectly composed in Martinez's grip, showing none of the aggression from moments before, his intelligent gaze almost resolute. "What have you done?" Adler whispered, pressing harder on the bleeding man's wounds. "Jesus Christ, Scout, what have you done? They're going to kill you for this." And in that moment, Officer Adler knew, with sickening certainty, that Scout's fate had just been sealed by 13 seconds of inexplicable violence. The ambulance arrived within minutes, paramedics pushing through the gathered crowd. The injured man, who identified himself as Anton Myers, continued to scream about lawsuits between gasps of pain. "Officer, we need details," the lead paramedic said, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric. He whistled low when the injury was fully exposed. "Jesus, this is extensive." "The dog just attacked," Adler explained numbly, his uniform pants soaked with Myers' blood. "No warning, no provocation. Nothing like this has ever happened before." "You hear that?" Myers called weakly from the gurney. "Your dog castrated me. I'll own your entire department when my lawyer finishes with you." Captain Reynolds pushed through the crowd, his expression thunderous. After a brief assessment, he turned to Adler, his voice low and final. "Officer Adler, you're suspended pending investigation. Surrender your weapon and badge." The reality of the situation crashed down on Adler as he complied automatically. In the background, he could hear Reynolds radioing for an animal transport unit. "Captain, what's going to happen to Scout?" Adler asked, already knowing the answer. "Department policy is clear," Reynolds replied without emotion. "A K-9 that attacks without provocation or command undergoes evaluation, but with injuries this severe..." He left the sentence unfinished. A specialized K-9 transport vehicle arrived within minutes. The handler approached Scout cautiously, clearly expecting resistance, but the German shepherd allowed himself to be led into the reinforced cage without hesitation. "Sir, we need to find that little girl," Martinez reminded Reynolds. "She witnessed everything and ran off crying." Adler watched helplessly as Scout was secured in the transport vehicle, their eyes meeting briefly through the reinforced windows. The dog's calm gaze communicated something Adler couldn't interpret. Not fear, not confusion, but something almost like certainty. The department conference room felt suffocatingly small the next morning. Adler sat alone at the far end of the table, keenly aware of the empty space beside him, where Scout would normally lie during briefings. Chief Wilson stood grim-faced beside a large monitor, displaying frozen video footage from a bystander's phone. "Before we begin," Wilson announced, "I want to emphasize that this meeting is about determining facts, not casting blame. Officer Adler has an exemplary record, as did K-9 Scout, prior to yesterday's incident." The word "did," past tense, sent a cold spike through Adler's chest. Wilson nodded to the technical officer who started the video. The footage played in high-definition brutality. Scout breaking free, the targeted attack, the blood, the screaming. Adler forced himself to watch, searching for any clue, any trigger that might explain Scout's behavior. Diane Mercer from County Animal Control stood to speak. "Based on preliminary findings, this appears to be an unprovoked Level 5 aggression incident, the most severe classification for a working K-9. She placed a folder on the table. Medical report from County General. Mr. Myers has undergone 5 hours of microsurgery. The damage is substantial. His reproductive function is likely permanently compromised." Chief Wilson added, "Myers' attorney delivered this statement an hour ago. My client demands the immediate euthanasia of the dangerous animal that attacked him without provocation, along with appropriate compensation for his life-altering injuries." They're asking for 7 figures. Detective Garcia, a veteran investigator with salt and pepper hair, cleared his throat. "What about the little girl? Any statement from her yet?" Officers canvassed the apartment complex, Martinez replied. Several residents recognized her description as Cassandra Miller, 8 years old, but they haven't returned home since the incident. Adler finally spoke, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. Has anyone checked security cameras from the surrounding businesses? Maybe they caught something the phone videos didn't. Already in progress, Garcia confirmed. Most businesses in the plaza use private security companies. We've submitted requests to all of them, but it's Sunday. Many corporate offices are closed until tomorrow. Mercer consulted her notes. Department policy regarding canines involved in unprovoked attacks is quite clear. With a level 5 incident involving severe injury, the outcome is typically predetermined. Predetermined, Adler repeated hollowly. You mean Scout will be put down regardless of the evaluation? I'm afraid the liability is too great, Chief Wilson said with genuine regret. If we returned him to service and this happened again, the department would be legally indefensible. 4 years without a single incident, Adler insisted, desperation edging into his voice. 4 years of perfect service. Doesn't that count for something? Mercer consulted her calendar. The review committee is scheduled to meet tomorrow at 8 a.m., given the severity and public nature of this incident. Plus the medical prognosis for Mr. Myers, a decision will likely be rendered immediately thereafter. Tomorrow, Adler felt the room tilt. That's not enough time for a proper investigation. Detective Garcia will prioritize securing any available security footage, Wilson assured Adler. If there's anything that might explain Scout's behavior, we'll find it. As the meeting concluded, Adler approached Garcia. I know Scout, he said, his voice low and intense. He doesn't attack without reason. There was something about Myers, something I missed, but Scout didn't. The door to Adler's apartment closed behind him with a hollow thud. The silence was oppressive, emphasizing Scout's absence from his usual spot on the worn leather couch. Photographs lined the hallway. Adler and Scout at their academy graduation, Scout with his first drug bust, the two of them receiving a commendation after finding that lost child during the winter storm last year. What did you see, buddy? Adler whispered to the empty apartment. What did you know that I didn't? He remembered the first time he'd met Scout at the Regional Canine Training Center. The German Shepherd had been 18 months old, already displaying exceptional aptitude, but struggling with rotating handlers. Scout had simply sat, studying Adler with an intelligence that felt almost human in its assessment. No barking, no tail wagging, just that steady, evaluating gaze. You're the real deal, aren't you? He'd said quietly. Not just a tool or a weapon, a thinker. Scout had tilted his head slightly, ears forward, and in that moment, a connection had formed that transcended the usual handler-canine relationship. Their first major case had come 3 months later, a warehouse drug bust that had gone sideways when the suspects tried to flee through a hidden exit. Scout had tracked one suspect through an industrial maze of shipping containers, cornering him without a single command from Adler. Then there was the Henderson case. An autistic 6-year-old had wandered away during a school nature hike, disappearing into dense woodland as a storm approached. 3 canine units had searched for hours as the temperature dropped and rain turned to sleet. The other teams had eventually been pulled back due to deteriorating conditions, but Scout had refused to quit, dragging Adler through nearly a mile of dense underbrush to find the boy huddled in a drainage pipe, hypothermic but alive. The sound of his phone shattered the memories. His ex-wife's name flashed on the screen. Sean, I saw the news. Sarah's voice was unexpectedly gentle. I'm so sorry about Scout. Is there anything I can do? Unless you can convince the department that my partner isn't a dangerous animal, no, Adler replied, surprising himself with the bitterness in his voice. He's a good dog, Sarah said softly. The best. Remember when he found my mom's wedding ring in that park after she thought it was gone forever? Despite everything, Adler felt his lips curl into a small smile. Searched for 3 hours in the dark. Wouldn't give up. That's who he is, Sarah affirmed. Not whatever happened today. Sleep came in fitful bursts. interrupted by nightmares of Scout on a cold metal table, eyes fixed on Adler as a needle delivered death into his veins. Morning found him haggard and unshaven at the department's K-9 holding facility. The supervising officer, Evans, led him to Scout's temporary kennel. "He's been a model detainee," Evans noted. "Hasn't made a sound since arrival. Most dogs in his situation are stressed, barking, pacing. He just sits there, watching the door like he's expecting someone." Scout rose immediately when he saw Adler, approaching the kennel bars with perfect composure. No whining, no excited jumping, just that steady, intelligent gaze that had drawn Adler to him in the first place. "Hey, partner," Adler said, kneeling to be at eye level. "What happened out there?" In the background, children's voices drifted from the park adjacent to the facility, and Adler noticed Scout's ears immediately pivot toward the sound, his body tensing slightly before relaxing again. "He does that every time kids are in the park," Evans observed. "Gets super alert, then settles back down, almost like he's checking on them." Adler felt something click in his mind. Not an answer, but the first hint of a question. "Did you say every time?" "Yeah, like clockwork. Hears kids, goes on alert, then stands down, almost like he's checking on them." The department conference room felt more like a funeral parlor when Adler arrived for the afternoon meeting. The department's legal counsel, Sandra Morris, greeted him with professional detachment and slid a document across the table. Anton Myers's multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the department. "The liability is simply too great," Morris explained. "If we retained Scout and this happened again, the department would be legally indefensible." The meeting proceeded with the mechanical inevitability of a train wreck in slow motion. A knock at the door interrupted Mercer's summary of similar K-9 attack cases. Detective Garcia entered, tablet in hand, his expression apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt. I've been checking with businesses around the plaza for security footage. Most of their cameras don't cover the area where the incident occurred, and those that might have partial views have 48-hour deletion cycles. With today being Sunday, most corporate security offices are closed until tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow will be too late," Adler said, unable to keep the desperation from his voice. "The review committee will have made their decision by then." The conference room monitor flickered to life, displaying a video feed from County General Hospital. Anton Myers appeared on screen, propped up in a hospital bed, his face pale and drawn with pain. His attorney sat beside him. "That animal tried to tear me apart for no reason," Myers said, his voice thin but determined. "I was just shopping, minding my own business. I may never function normally again. It needs to be put down before it hurts someone else." After the video ended, the room fell silent. Captain Reynolds finally spoke. "The review committee will now deliberate in private." The committee's deliberation took exactly 17 minutes. When the door opened, the expressions on their faces told Adler everything. "The committee has reached a unanimous decision," Mercer announced formally. "Based on the severity of the unprovoked attack, K-9 Scout is deemed a public safety risk and will be humanely euthanized tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. 9 a.m., Adler repeated numbly. "That's barely enough time to say goodbye," Reynolds finished gently. "We're granting you full visitation rights until the procedure." The K-9 facility's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Adler sat cross-legged on the concrete floor outside Scout's kennel. Night had fallen hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to leave, not when these were the final hours he would ever spend with his partner. Scout lay close to the bars, occasionally pressing his muzzle through the gap to touch Adler's hand, as if offering comfort rather than seeking it. Dr. Mitchell had stopped by earlier to explain the procedure with compassionate professionalism. "We'll administer a sedative first so he'll be completely relaxed and unaware. The actual euthanasia solution works very quickly. He won't feel any pain or distress." The clinical description had made Adler physically ill. Scout, who had saved lives, protected the innocent, served with unwavering loyalty, would be put down like a dangerous stray. "I don't understand," Adler whispered. What did you see? What made you break that lead? The facility door opened, and Adler looked up to find Officers Martinez, Chen, and Wachowski, fellow K-9 handlers, entering the corridor. For an hour, they shared stories, celebrating Scout's career while carefully avoiding direct mention of tomorrow's looming reality. Adler's phone rang shortly after midnight. Detective Garcia's name flashed on the screen. Please tell me you have something, Adler answered, without preamble. Still working on it, Garcia replied. I've contacted the ATM service company for the machine across from where the incident happened. They're checking if their security camera might have captured anything. But Adler, they can't guarantee access to the footage before morning. Morning will be too late, Adler said. The procedure is scheduled for 9 a.m. I know. I'm doing everything I can. How's Scout holding up? Adler glanced at his partner, who had risen to alertness at the sound of the phone. Better than me, honestly. It's like he's accepted it, while I'm still fighting it. As the night deepened, Adler remained on the floor beside Scout's kennel, sometimes talking softly about their cases together, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally overcame him, and he drifted into uneasy sleep, his hand reaching through the bars to rest on Scout's paw. He woke to the sound of the facility door opening. Morning light filtered through the high windows as Mercer entered with Dr. Mitchell and the official paperwork clutched in her hand. It's time, Officer Adler, she said, her professional demeanor tempered with genuine sympathy. We've prepared the procedure room. Adler opened Scout's kennel, kneeling to secure the muzzle with gentle hands. Last walk, partner, he whispered, his voice breaking slightly as he clipped the leash to Scout's collar. Scout followed with perfect heel position as they walked down the corridor to the small room prepared for the procedure. Inside, a padded table had been covered with a clean blanket. Nearby stood a medical cart with syringes carefully arranged. Adler knelt before Scout, removing the muzzle to look directly into his partner's eyes. You were the best, he said, no longer trying to hold back tears. The very best. Whatever you saw, whatever you knew, I believe you had a reason. I just wish I could have understood. Scout pressed his forehead against Adler's chest in a gesture so human-like it took Adler's breath away. Then he stepped back and jumped onto the table without being asked, lying down with his typical perfect composure, eyes fixed on Adler with complete trust. Dr. Mitchell approached with the first syringe, expression solemn. Are you ready? No, Adler admitted, but I won't leave him. He positioned himself at Scout's head, hands gently cradling his partner's face as Mitchell prepared the injection site on Scout's hind leg. I'm right here, buddy. Right here with you. The procedure room door burst open with a crash. Detective Garcia stood in the doorway, breathing hard, tablet clutched in his hand. Stop! You need to see this right now. What the hell, Garcia? Dr. Mitchell demanded, syringe still poised above Scout's leg. Security footage, Garcia gasped, clearly having ran from the parking lot. From the ATM across from the attack site. You need to see what happened before Scout attacked. Adler felt a surge of desperate hope as Garcia placed the tablet on a nearby counter, positioning it so everyone could see. The footage showed a wide-angle view of the plaza, slightly grainy, but clear enough to identify individuals. Myers appeared at the edge of the frame, seemingly browsing shop windows, but Garcia quickly pointed out what wasn't apparent in the bystander videos. Watch his eyes. He's not looking at the displays. He's watching the playground. As the footage continued, Myers' behavior became increasingly obvious. He would pretend to examine store merchandise. Then his gaze would shift toward the playground, focusing particularly on young Cassie. On screen, Myers gradually positioned himself between Cassie and the bench where her mother sat, absorbed in her phone. The little girl, unaware of his attention, continued playing with a small toy. My God, Mercer whispered, her professional detachment cracking as the pattern became undeniable. It gets worse, Garcia said grimly. While waiting for this footage, I ran a complete background check on Anton Myers. He pulled out a printed report. 3 previous convictions for child molestation. Recently released after serving 7 years for attempted kidnapping of a 9-year-old girl. He's a registered sex offender who wasn't supposed to be within 500 feet of playgrounds or schools. When officers searched Myers, At the hospital, Garcia continued, they found these in his pockets. He held up an evidence bag containing colorful candy and several zip ties, standard lures used by predators. Adler felt lightheaded, memories rushing back, Scout's sudden alertness, his focused determination, the way he had specifically targeted Myers' groin area rather than a limb or torso, as canines were typically trained to do. He knew, Adler said, his voice barely audible. Somehow, Scout recognized what Myers was doing, what he was planning to do to that little girl. There's more, Garcia added. Cassie's family finally came forward this morning after seeing news reports. According to her mother, Cassie told her she ran because she was scared of the bad man who kept looking at me. Dr. Mitchell immediately withdrew the syringe from Scout's vicinity, carefully recapping it. Based on this evidence, I cannot in good conscience proceed with this euthanasia. Agreed, Mercer said, already reaching for the euthanasia order. With deliberate movements, she tore the document in half. This changes everything. Scout wasn't displaying unprovoked aggression. He was protecting a child from a predator. Adler sank to his knees beside the table, overwhelming relief washing through him as he wrapped his arms around Scout's neck. The German shepherd leaned into the embrace, his tail wagging gently for the first time since the incident. He sensed what we couldn't see, Adler said, his voice thick with emotion. All those times at the K9 facility, when he'd alert whenever children's voices came from the park, he wasn't just hearing them. He was checking on them, making sure they were safe. The department will need to issue an immediate statement, Mercer said. The public needs to understand what actually happened here. Myers will face new charges, Garcia added. Violating parole conditions, being near a playground, possessing tools for potential abduction. Scout jumped down from the table with athletic grace, pressing against Adler's side, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if he hadn't been moments away from death. There was no resentment in his demeanor, no trauma, just the steady, intelligent presence that had made him such an exceptional partner. Come on, buddy, Adler said, clipping a regular lead to Scout's collar. Let's go home. The department press room buzzed with activity as journalists jostled for position. Chief Wilson stood flanked by Captain Reynolds and Officer Adler, with Scout sitting at perfect attention beside his handler. Security footage obtained from the scene clearly shows that the individual in question, Anton Myers, was exhibiting predatory behavior toward a young child immediately prior to the incident, Chief Wilson announced. Myers, a registered sex offender with multiple prior convictions for crimes against children, was in violation of his parole conditions by being near a playground area. On the large screen behind him, carefully edited portions of the ATM footage played, highlighting Myers' suspicious movements and focus on Cassie. The department has determined that K9 Scout was not displaying unprovoked aggression, but rather was responding to a legitimate threat to a vulnerable child. His actions, while unexpected, potentially prevented an abduction attempt. Later that afternoon, Cassie and her mother met with Adler and Scout in a small conference room. The little girl entered, holding tightly to her mother's hand, her eyes wide with apprehension, until they landed on Scout. Is it okay to pet him? Cassie asked softly. Of course, Adler replied, nodding to Scout, who understood the implicit permission to interact. As the little girl cautiously approached, Scout lowered his head slightly, making himself less intimidating. Her small hand reached out to stroke his fur, and a smile broke across her face. He's so soft. And he's the dog who scared away the bad man. Yes, her mother answered, eyes glistening with unshed tears as she looked at Adler. The officers told us what might have happened if your dog hadn't done what he did. I was so distracted with my phone I didn't even notice. Her voice broke. Scout was just doing his job, Adler said simply. Protecting people is what he lives for. Later that night, at home in his apartment, Adler watched Scout settle into his customary spot on the couch, the normality of the routine striking him as miraculous after how close they had come to losing everything. Scout's gaze met his, containing that same intelligence, that same depth that had drawn Adler to him from their first meeting. I should have never doubted you, Adler said softly. Not for a second. Scout blinked slowly in response, the canine equivalent of a smile, before resting his head on his paws and closing his eyes. Have you ever witnessed an animal sense danger before humans could detect it? That sixth sense that seems to transcend conventional understanding, alerting them to threats we might miss completely. What would you have done in Officer Adler's position? Trust the animal's instinct or the seemingly clear evidence of an unprovoked attack?
And how many times in your life have you dismissed unusual behavior from a pet or animal, only to discover later they were trying to tell you something important? Share your experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories of animal intuition. If today's story touched you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary K9 tales. Make sure to press the notification bell so you never miss our new uploads. Share this video with friends who appreciate the remarkable bond between handlers and their canine partners. Check out our other canine hero stories appearing on your screen right now, including the incredible tale of a search dog who found a missing Alzheimer's patient during a blizzard.
We'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another brand new video.